The world watched in stunned silence. News alerts flashed across screens globally. Operation Spiderweb was underway. This was not just another skirmish. It was a bold, deep strike by Ukrainian forces. The date was March 12, 2025. This operation signaled a new, audacious phase. The long war in Ukraine took a dramatic turn. The implications were immediate and far-reaching. This was a meticulously planned attack reaching deep inside Russian territory. It showed Ukraine's growing capability and exposed Russia's vulnerabilities. For years, the conflict had seen shifting fronts, but this felt different. Ukraine was now taking the fight directly to the aggressor. The risks were immense for everyone involved. This special report unpacks Operation Spiderweb, its planning, execution, and the diplomatic fallout. Peace talks, already fragile, faced new pressures in Istanbul. The hope for a negotiated end seemed to dim. The world held its breath. Now, on June 3, 2025, the dust has settled somewhat. Yet its impact continues to ripple outwards, reshaping military and diplomatic calculations. Understanding this operation and the failed talks that followed is key. It helps us grasp the current state of this brutal war, and it may hint at what the future holds for millions. Operation Spiderweb was a watershed moment. It involved a swarm of new, long-range, sophisticated and stealthy drones built to evade radar. Ukrainian engineers had worked for months to develop these unmanned aerial vehicles. Their mission: strike targets deep within Russia, far beyond the usual front lines. The targets were carefully selected: strategic bomber airfields, command centers, and radar installations. One key target was the Engels 2 airbase, home to bombers used against Ukraine. Ukraine coordinated multiple drone flights, penetrating hundreds of kilometers into Russian airspace. This required intricate logistics and flawless execution. The damage was significant. Several valuable Russian aircraft were destroyed or damaged, disrupting Russian operations. More than that, it sent a powerful psychological shockwave. Russia's heartland was no longer untouchable. This was a new chapter in the conflict. Moscow's initial reaction was shock, quickly turning to fury. Operation Spiderweb had bypassed layers of Russian air defenses once thought impenetrable. The drones struck with impunity, exposing a critical vulnerability. For a nation priding itself on military might, this was a harsh awakening. The Kremlin struggled to respond publicly. The attack delivered a significant blow to Russia's military prestige. How could Ukrainian drones penetrate so deep? Where were the S-400S? Why did early warning systems fail? Inside Russia, a blame game began. Military commanders faced intense scrutiny. The failure to protect strategic assets was undeniable. This setback was not just material, it was deeply psychological. Russia's leaders had underestimated Ukraine's technological advancements and daring. For months, Russia projected control. Operation Spiderweb shattered that narrative. The psychological impact on the Kremlin was profound. It forced a reassessment of Ukraine's capabilities and Russia's own defenses. Strategic bomber bases should be among the best protected sites. Their failure suggested systemic issues: complacency, outdated tech, or Ukraine's innovation. Russia's internal security apparatus now faced a crisis of confidence. Ukraine's strategy was now unmistakable: take the fight to Russian soil. This was about more than inflicting damage. It was about leverage. Ukraine aimed to show Russia the costs of continued aggression. The operation boosted morale at home and sent a message to international partners. Ukraine was capable of sophisticated, daring operations. The world reacted with a mix of awe and apprehension. Many Western nations privately admired Ukraine's audacity, seeing it as a legitimate response. Publicly, statements were cautious. Concerns about escalation loomed. Some non-Western countries called for restraint from both sides. The United Nations urged a return to diplomacy. The United States denied involvement, emphasizing that aid was for defense. Still, intelligence sharing likely continued. The US and NATO walked a fine line to support Ukraine, but avoid direct conflict with Russia. Operation Spiderweb tested those boundaries. The attack forced allies and adversaries alike to reconsider their strategies. Ukraine's resolve was clear. Russia's vulnerabilities were exposed. The world's attention was fixed on what would come next. The stakes had never been higher. The war had entered a new, unpredictable phase. The consequences would be global. As Operation Spiderweb unfolded, peace talks continued in Istanbul. Hopes for a diplomatic solution flickered, but the gap between sides was vast. Ukraine demanded full territorial integrity, security guarantees, Russian troop withdrawal, reparations and accountability for war crimes. Russia insisted on Ukrainian neutrality, recognition of Crimea, acceptance of new territorial realities in Donbas, and demilitarization. The terms were irreconcilable. Operation Spiderweb, while boosting Ukrainian morale, may have hardened positions. Russia, embarrassed, was less inclined to concede. Ukraine, emboldened, felt less pressure to compromise. The talks collapsed in late March. Each side blamed the other. Deep mistrust permeated the negotiations. The world watched as hopes for peace faded. The war's brutality continued. Istanbul became another failed chapter in the search for peace. The consequences of the operation echoed in every diplomatic hall. The path to compromise seemed blocked. The conflict was set to escalate. The world braced for what would follow. President Zelensky addressed his nation with determination. Ukraine will not yield. We fight for our land, our freedom, our future. He called for international support, insisting peace must respect Ukraine's sovereignty. Russian officials, including President Putin, condemned the operation and blamed NATO. Putin declared, "Russia's goals will be achieved. No provocation will deter us." International voices weighed in, with calls for a strong deal to end the war. The United Nations urged de-escalation and protection of civilians. Despite failed talks, calls for renewed negotiations emerged, but conditions remained elusive. The humanitarian crisis deepened as the world waited for a breakthrough. After Operation Spiderweb and the failed Istanbul talks, the conflict entered a new, uncertain phase. Escalation from Russia was a real threat. Retaliation loomed. Alternatively, the war could settle into a grinding stalemate. Ukraine's goals remained: liberate all territory, restore 1991 borders, ensure long-term security, and rebuild with international help. Russia's objectives shifted: consolidate occupied territories, secure a land bridge to Crimea, and prevent Ukraine's western alignment. Projecting strength despite setbacks was crucial for the Kremlin. Both sides dug in, preparing for a long war of attrition. The shadow of continued conflict loomed large, yet, even in darkness, the desire for peace endured. Operation Spiderweb changed the military landscape. It might force a more realistic assessment from all sides. The international community must persist in seeking a just, lasting peace. The alternative is more suffering, more destruction. The hope for peace, however slim, must be kept alive. The world watches, waiting for a turning point. The stakes are immense. The future remains unwritten.